The Montgomery County Black Collective and the State of Black Montgomery present the Black Agenda 2021. Event 2. The time is now. Media services provided by Montgomery Community Media.
Good morning and welcome. I am Lori Ann Sales, council member from the city of Gaithersburg, a partner in the Montgomery County Black Collective, and a member of the Association of Black Democrats, creators of the annual State of Black Montgomery. We are so pleased that you are joining us this beautiful Saturday morning, ready to engage in this critical, interactive event. For those who did not attend our inaugural event last month, you may wonder what the Black Collective is. Last fall, a small group of Black CEOs, nonprofit executives, directors, and community leaders met regularly to discuss inequities in grant funding and contract awards made to Black-led nonprofits and businesses working to affect change within the county's Black community. It all started with an email announcing grants awarded to organizations throughout the state. Unfortunately, out of 30 plus organizations, none were Black-led. As we compared notes and shared our experiences, we agreed that it was time to foster unity and address the challenges that have been prevalent for years. Despite the dedicated efforts of Black-led nonprofits and businesses addressing disparities in our community from health and education to business and economic development, many are not receiving the funding and contract awards that other communities receive. Yet, they continue to make an impact while struggling to survive. Unfortunately, many do not have the infrastructure, the grant writers, or the time to do the networking and receive invitations to tables where funding opportunities and policy decisions happen. And so, the Montgomery County Black Collective was born. We believe we are stronger together if we join all sectors: business, nonprofit, faith community, civic organizations, and beyond. And we unite from all corners of the diaspora: African American, African, and Caribbean communities. Based on what we have witnessed and experienced over the last year, there is an urgency to collaborate, connect, and command transformation. And it is no mistake that today's event occurs between two important observances in our history: the 100th remembrance of the Tulsa Race Massacre and the horrific murders of as many as 300 Black lives in the all-Black district of Greenwood, widely known as Black Wall Street, and Juneteenth, happening next week, happening on June 19th. A day celebrated as the emancipation of our enslaved ancestors. Despite efforts to silence our stories, bury our brilliance, and subvert our strength, we are here. We are resilient and we continue to rise. One influencer noted, merely existing as a Black business owner in this nation is a revolutionary act. The time is now. Let's take this unprecedented step and work collectively across all sectors and throughout the diaspora to demand the change we seek. The goals of the collective and what we hope to achieve are: first, to define the spectrum of the county's Black community and present a comprehensive assessment of the current state of our residents; to address the prevailing disparities using data and documentation to influence the county government's commitment to equity, to set an agenda that ensures an equitable distribution of resources and full inclusion in the policies that will improve and sustain all Black lives. To take action, we're going to develop an actionable accountability plan with priorities, milestones, and metrics to monitor the transformation of our health, education, and economic conditions. The first action we have taken is to launch the Black Agenda 2021, a 4-part virtual event series designed to mobilize and discuss the current state and future of the Black community. Today's event is an opportunity to amplify your voice, share your experiences, and contribute to developing a clear set of priorities and asks regarding health, education, and the economic empowerment of Black lives in the community. These priorities will be summarized in a 2-page brief presented to elected officials, business leaders, and funders, requesting their firm commitment and collaboration to affect the substantial changes we seek. On June 24th, we will meet with these individuals to discuss our concerns and requested solutions. We will reconvene on July 14th to review what we have learned and finalize a 2021 Black agenda to hold elected leaders countywide accountable for their commitments. In addition, we will meet regularly to assess the progress made or not and act accordingly to either laud the success or sound the alarm. To ensure our time together today is productive and seamless, here are a few virtual event guidelines. First, keep your microphones muted while others are speaking to limit sound distortions and disruptions. In the breakout rooms, practice patience and courtesy, using the raise hand function if you have a comment to share while someone else is speaking. Please maintain positive and encouraging communications throughout the event. And lastly, the event is being recorded. The opening and closing portions will be edited and posted on the collective's YouTube channel. The breakout session recordings will not be posted and only used for note-taking purposes to ensure we do not miss critical points discussed. To inform the breakout discussions this session, we will receive information and data points from experts working within the county, confirming the very inequities and challenges many of us encounter. Before I go any further, let's stop and recognize an individual who exemplifies Black excellence. There are many individuals we encounter in life that leave an indelible mark. They are trailblazers that rise above adversity to question the status quo, disrupt antiquated systems, and challenge inequities designed to devalue and disregard the humanity of others based on the hue of their skin. To set the tone for today's gathering, we want to pause and recognize one such individual, Dr. Darion Pollard, president of Montgomery College. Many of you may know that she is leaving to become the next president of Nevada State College in Henderson, Nevada. In 2010, Dr. Pollard assumed leadership of Montgomery College, a 3-campus community college with nearly 60,000 credit and non-credit students. As its leader, Dr. Pollard directed the development of a new mission and strategic plan. She didn't lead solely within the college campuses. Her impact was far-reaching. For example, she partnered actively with Montgomery County Public Schools and the universities at Shady Grove to create ACES, Achieving Collegiate Excellence and Success, a support program designed to help students transform and transition from high school to college completion. She led the creation of a partnership with the leading research firm, Westat, to advance equity for male students of color. She stressed a systemic imperative to concentrate efforts to improve outcomes and provide the tools for students of color to be successful and achieve our highest potential. Under her leadership, Montgomery College's efforts received national recognition. In 2015, the college received an American Association for Community Colleges Award of Excellence in the Emerging Leadership category. The following year, the college received the award for the Outstanding College Corporate Partnership category. In 2018, it was ranked as the most diverse mainland community college in the nation in a Chronicle of Higher Education survey. That fall semester, 78% of MC students were non-white and 26% were Black. Dr. Pollard personifies the meaning of Black excellence, and she encouraged and expected it from her students. She charged them to be the B-ballers and the shot callers during a message to young Black and brown young men. She encouraged them to not be comfortable with sitting on the sidelines, but to own it. While she could not join us this morning, we appreciate that she recorded a video message that we're going to share with you this morning.
Hello, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to share a few thoughts on several pertinent issues to today's program. As a leader who has worked for equity and racial justice in Montgomery County for more than a decade, my personal commitment to radical inclusion has a long track record. But that only matters because I have been part of an institution that has been deeply committed to empowering students to change their lives and enhancing the life of our community. Montgomery College has been joined by so many in being creative and being engaged around the type of work that's necessary, the type of work that you're doing that calls out inequities and poses solutions to structural racism. And that's an important point. The idea of being able to not only call out and name problems, but then begin to offer solutions that disrupt the cycle of those problems, I think is where we need to focus our attention as a community. This didn't happen overnight. At the college, we've been purposeful and intrusive about calling out inequities in academic performance and completion rates and transferring, looking at our data and using that data to help us interpret what's happening. We've responded just not by building awareness, but by demanding difference. My presidential dialogue series this year has been devoted to racial justice. We've looked at issues such as policing, and we talked with our local police chief in the wake of George Floyd's murder. We interviewed the ACLU's legal director to help us confront inequities in criminal justice sentencing. And I talked about health disparities with our own county health officer. The college has hosted dozens of events just this year to unpack the anguish that's created by police violence against people of color and the recent centennial of the Tulsa massacre. When our students see themselves in these events, we transform the emotion into lessons in history, economics, and sociology. And perhaps when we're very, very good, we also help people understand how they can be deeply engaged in the evolution around the issues that we're grappling with. I'll offer to you that Montgomery College is deeply committed to closing the gaps in health, wealth, and education, and to transforming the thinking around our creation and why these things exist in our society. And that's why we're creating the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation that will be opening next fall. And we'll be hosting some powerful conversations about the racial history of our nation. And that's why we created the ACES program, Achieving Collegiate Excellence and Success, in partnership with the Montgomery County Public School System, as well as universities of Shady Grove. And that's why we conducted a study of African American youth in collaboration with the Community Foundation to better understand the needs of communities that oftentimes have not had the amplification of their voice and their lived experience. And most recently, that's why we created the Presidential Scholars Program, focusing on increasing the completion rates of men of color while preparing them for a high-skilled workforce. One cannot begin to create race-based solutions unless you acknowledge that there are race-based problems. And that's been an important part of our work at Montgomery College. Now, leading Montgomery College has been a journey for me that is both personal and professional. When I see young men of color at my school, I see my own son, who is just 14, but thinks that he's 21 sometimes. He has a lot of advantages. I own the privilege that we bring into this family for him, many of which my students at Montgomery College don't have. But when he steps out into the wider world, he is still going to be a Black boy. He will be a Black man. And how people perceive him is something I'm consciously aware of each and every day. And that still means different and difference in many communities in which he will travel. We're changing that. With many partners in our community, we haven't yet crossed the finish line, but I will tell you there's something special in this community that's happening around these issues. Equity has to be deep-seated in communities like this one and embodied by the stakeholders in our midst. Now, I'm so grateful to those of you who are already connected with the college and have shared your time and energy with us. And I hope that the college can continue to rely on you for support and mentoring of our students, many of whom need that personal touch to see themselves as successful college students. They can benefit from connections, internships, and overall encouragement in their journeys. I've been on the receiving end of such support so many times in my life, and I know for sure that I make it a practice to pay it forward because I know I would not be here if it were not for those experiences and people who interceded. It has been my great privilege to be a part of building racial justice in Montgomery County, and I know that it will continue to grow as I move on into my own next phase. I'm hopeful that groups like this one will help Montgomery College to continue to build success in higher education and increase opportunity for everyone in our midst. Thank you for letting me share some observations, and I certainly wish you the best. And I look forward to seeing this success because I will be watching. Thank you. Be well.
What a powerful message from a powerful woman. While Dr. Pollard's departure is a loss for our community, we will miss her greatly. The impact that she leaves will be experienced for decades to come. Her demonstrated acts of good trouble and affirming words should encourage and motivate us to continue her transformational work. Now let's gain insight into the state of our health, education, and economic conditions. I am pleased to introduce Dr. Raymond Crowell, Director of the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Crowell is a clinical psychologist, psychotherapist, and senior manager. He has 30 years of experience working in complex systems, developing and evaluating outcome-based programs, building coalitions, and promoting cultural and linguistic competency. Before serving as the department director, Dr. Crowell directed the county's behavioral health and crisis services system, including mental health, crisis services, substance abuse treatment, domestic violence, and victims services. Dr. Crowell, welcome.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. Elijah Wheeler invited me to do this, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it, but he called me back and was, again, rather persistent about it, which is what I need him to be sometimes. So I'm happy to have a chance to join you all. I want to talk about a couple of things this morning. One is just a little bit about our experience in this past year, which everybody knows has been horrific and particularly damaging for the Black community, and then talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing this past year, and maybe end with a little bit about where I see health and human services and hopefully this county going in the year coming, and how that relates to the Black community, and what my ask of this group will be, because I do have an ask for this group as we go forward. To begin with, just to talk about the impact of COVID on the Black community this past year. And I'm talking now about Montgomery County data over the life of this pandemic, beginning back in the first months of the pandemic. Just looking at the total number of cases and where we sat in this. At the start of this pandemic, we were about 26 Black Montgomery accounted for about 26% of the total cases that we were seeing in the early months. Beginning around May through February, that number dropped. We dropped as low as 10% of the total cases to 18% of the total cases, all the way through February. We remained fairly low, which we took as a good sign that people were staying out of harm's way. But in the last 3 months, March, April, and May, our percentage of case rates has started to climb. 21% in March, 27% in April, and 31% in May. And June is early, so we don't know the June data yet. But we're seeing those numbers go up as the total number of cases across the county goes down, which means that our vulnerability is remaining a little higher than perhaps it should be. When we look at death rates over the life of the pandemic, we see the same thing. We were as low as 7.4% of all deaths in the county in October. And in May, as of May, we're back at 29% of all deaths in the county. So we are seeing some continuing disparities in the trends, and those are obviously cause for some concern. If I can, I want to share one thing on my screen with you all really quick and show you a couple of things here. Hopefully you are seeing a picture of a slide, and hopefully it's large enough for you to be able to see. Can you see that well enough? Can someone give me a nod? Is that okay?
You can make it a little bigger.
Make it a little bigger. Let's see if I can do that. How about we do this? Let's see. Is that helping any? Oh, too big now? Is that too big or is that good?
That's good now.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to call your attention to a couple of things. This is over the lifetime of vaccinations in the county. We're at 53%. Actually, we're a little higher than that now in terms of total vaccinations. But when you look at Black and African American community, we represent about 19% of the population overall, but are vaccinating at about 14% we represent about 14% of vaccinations that have been administered across the county. So we are underrepresented in the number of vaccines that have been received in the county. When we look at the disparities over time, and I particularly want to call your attention to the upper left table and the lower right one. On the upper left side, it is vaccination rates for persons who are 65 and older. And what you see, and what we've seen, is that over time there was a lag, and over time the Black and Latino communities began to close that gap in comparison to the white communities. Asian Americans have over-vaccinated in higher rates relative to the white community. And that's the top level line. But what we see is a closing of the gap in the 65 and older group. When we look at 12 to 64, down in the lower right corner, we see this gap. This 13% gap between the general vaccination rates across the county and where the Black community has been. And it has been a source of serious concern for myself and Dr. Gales and over in my public health service area, in terms of the slower rate in which we begin to close that gap in the Black community. And then the last one is, this is for 12 to 18-year-olds. And what we see in the lower chart is, this is for Pfizer vaccinations. What we see in the lower chart is exactly the same kind of issue, is the gap for 12 to 18-year-olds. Now that we're vaccinating, a 27% gap in terms of vaccinations for our children. So those three pieces of information are some concern, of considerable concern to us. We are coming near the end of the school year, and students will start dispersing to go wherever they go. For me, that was down to Arkansas to spend summer with my grandparents. But we want to try to get folks vaccinated before they leave. There is a little there was a post in the Washington Post, a story in the Washington Post this week that got very little attention, that looked at the differential risk for people who've been vaccinated and who haven't been vaccinated, and the risk of subsequent infection and hospitalization for unvaccinated populations remains much higher than it does for folks who've been vaccinated. So it's a concern for us about getting vaccinated. We are coming out of this pandemic. The numbers are low, but they have not gone away, and the risk for Black folks remains high. At the start of this vaccination effort, one of the things I said to the community was that I did not want Black and African American residents in Montgomery County to be the last folks getting the vaccine and the last folks dying and getting disease as a result of not getting the vaccine. And so my concerns and my worry is very much that we are not yet quite vaccinating at the levels that we need to get us out of this pandemic. So one of the things that we've been working on around this, since we first recognized the disparity, we stood up an equity framework. In the early days when vaccines were scarce, we wanted to make sure that our communities of color had access to the vaccine and opportunities to schedule an appointment for vaccines. And so we created a process that delayed registration and gave us some control over where we sent invitations to come and get a vaccine. And we did that using our data to tell us where people were under vaccinating and where the greatest risk was, where people were seeing the highest rates of infection. And that, of course, was in our Black communities. And so we targeted vaccination appointments to the Black community. And that's how we closed that disparity in the 65 and older age range. And we're doing some of the same process. We're still using a variation of that process now to target our stand-up sites and our local small pods, vaccination points of delivery into communities where the vaccinations have been, where vaccine uptake has been the slowest. And that still remains in very predictable communities and our communities of color. I had a moment where I was a little frightened, actually, about 2 months ago. I was down at Paddington Square. We were doing a combination. The African American Health Program was doing a combination of testing and vaccination. And the folks who were managing the testing reported to me that they were seeing people who had not yet been tested for COVID-19. So we've got communities where even something as simple, as straightforward as testing at this point isn't happening on a regular basis. We are working with FEMA and with the state to try to push opportunities for vaccination deeper into communities and to make them available in the Black communities. We are doing, and I don't know that it has been publicly announced yet, but we are working with African American Health Program is planning on doing a Juneteenth celebration, doing vaccination and celebration event to get folks to come out, have some fun, get vaccinated, get tested. And so I'm looking forward to how that turns out. And I will be there and ready to have some fun with the community. As we come out of this, well, there are a couple of things. One of the challenges that we faced going into this, and COVID made it abundantly apparent that we are vulnerable in terms of access, in terms of our status, our health status, in terms of our economic, the social determinants of health that put us, that have always existed, were put on full front screen and on blast to tell us, to make it clear just how much ground we've got to cover. We don't have a lot of a strong and robust community of Black providers that are in any way associated with the county government in partnership in the way that we have Healthy Montgomery. We have Montgomery Cares clinics that serve underserved communities and populations and communities of color. We don't have that equivalent in the Black community. AAHP, as part of its process, is working to develop a Black physicians partnership and network to strengthen that community. But that is going to need some additional support and some partners to do the ongoing development of that network. We are working with providers to make that happen now. One of the things that will come out of this for Health and Human Services as we look forward to the end of the pandemic is addressing those health comorbidities, but also looking at economic issues, looking at eviction prevention. We expect to continue that. that work and expand our mental health and our trauma work in particular, especially the trauma work related to COVID for folks who were shut down and in isolation, but also the trauma work that is associated with racism that we have seen in this last year. It has been intense and it has been painful. And we are now in a place where systems are beginning to recognize that that has to get addressed in a more formal way. We are working with, in terms of our youth, we're working with Montgomery County school systems now to create mental health alternatives to SROs, because we know about the disparate treatment and disparate suspensions and expulsions and involvement with SROs that law enforcement sometimes has. I take nothing from the SROs in their work, but I think and their engagement with students, but we need a different way of doing it and some alternatives. So we're working on those issues, and we're working with the department and the county police department and law enforcement agencies to create alternatives around reimagining public safety. For this year, I lost a year in some respects in my role as director of the department. July will be my second year. This first year will be the completion of my second year. My second year was lost to COVID. I had a lot of plans for things that I wanted to do with this department that would strengthen it and create some better access. We gained something in COVID in that we now understand how to look at data and use data in a whole different way. I can now tell you down to a census tract area where people are not getting vaccinated. I can tell you down to an apartment complex where people are underserved. And I can look at that by race and ethnicity. And I intend to use that data as part of my rebuilding of HHS to create equity and access. Is one of my guideposts for how we rebuild this department. I want to make sure that we know who we're serving, who we're not serving, where those gaps are, and plug those gaps as part of our effort to promote racial equity and social justice. So that's at least a piece of the work that I will use the data for. I know that the disparities in access exist within HHS, both in terms of the personnel we use, how we approach the work, where the work is, and who we partner with in the community. So I've got to rebuild. I want to use whatever time I have left in this office to try to rebuild HHS in a way that actually does respond more appropriately to the needs and addresses the racial and ethnic disparities that have become apparent this year. My challenge and my ask is that we are starting a process for identifying those priorities and planning for the next budget year. There are things we'll do this year to try to promote recovery, but the real work is in FY23 and beyond, as we get ready to roll into roll completely out of pandemic and into the future post-pandemic world. The need will be for input. So I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing your final report, because that will help guide some of my thinking and some of my team and my department's planning for how we begin to put forth a budget recommendations to the county executive for next year for the department, and recommendations to council for how we need to move forward in addressing racial equity and social justice. So I will stop there, and happy to be. I'm around for a while with you all yet, because I want to hear a little bit more about what's going on from some other folks. So thank you for given me an opportunity to talk to you today.
Thank you again, Dr. Crowell, for joining us, for your overview of Black communities, our healthcare status in Montgomery County, and especially through the lens of equity, the pandemic recovery, and systemic inequities. The lessons we've learned across all sectors will help inform better policies to target our interventions and allow us to build back better for Black residents in our county. So thank you again. Now we're going to shift our focus to economic development and the impact of county grant and procurement processes on Black-owned businesses and Black-led nonprofits. We will first hear from Ms. Carolyn Chen, the Council Grants Manager in the Office of the Montgomery County Council. Carolyn's portfolio includes county-wide grants for 300 plus nonprofits in our county in health and human services, youth development, economic and workforce development, and arts and humanities organizations, and creative class professionals. Her background is in business development strategy, cause marketing, venture philanthropy, and fundraising in the healthcare, education, and nonprofit sectors. In addition, she managed the White Flint Downtown Sectors Advisory Committee for Montgomery County on strategic planning for Maryland's first business improvement district. Carolyn, welcome.
Thank you so much, Lorianne. I hope everybody has a wonderful morning. I'm just going to try to. All right. Good morning. Hi, everybody. I'm Carolyn Chen. I think I know everybody here, which is awesome. I'm legislative analyst in the Montgomery County Council. I've started a couple years ago managing the community grants portfolio, the famous, infamous community grants portfolio about 4 budget cycles ago. I'd like to state for the first time in the history of Montgomery County that the community grants process, as you have known it for the last 40 some years, this is the first year that there were no political ads or favors or side grants that got added to the process. This is the first time. We can celebrate that or we can lament about that. That's up to you. But with that said, the state of community grants or grants to nonprofits in Montgomery County is evolving, and it's evolving quickly without much of a structure, which I believe is actually a good thing. One of the processes that we started prior to about 2 years prior to COVID was the development of an Office of Grants Management. Legislation to introduce that, as well as to reform the community grants process. When the pandemic hit, what we found out was that this process that had been put into place prior to this crisis was still relevant, and we could still go by our plan and our strategy, even though everything had shut down as we know it. And that was very important to me to be able to understand how powerful that is, to have a process and a strategy that made sense, even if all our processes have broken down. With that said, our Office of Grants Management legislation will be introduced, not reintroduced, but really rediscussed on June 16th for approval, discussion approval in around July, for possible opening in a 12-month period after that. What we're looking to do is to spend 12 months strategic planning for the office to discuss a process, human capital, anything you can think of that will make this Office of Grants Management work for the Montgomery County residents. One note is that the priority of the Office of Grants Management is to source funding for Montgomery County departments, as opposed to sourcing funding for individual nonprofits or individual executive directors of nonprofits. I think that also gives a much wider, broader umbrella or net that funding and the impact of the funding and the amount of funding that we can collectively focus here in the community. A couple of points. I know I've gone over my 5 minutes, but I did want to address questions that we have just spoke before about the community grants process. So the community grants process, as we have known it in the last couple of decades, has been historically deeply rooted in white supremacist structures, principles, and values. The processes and the models that we have seen in the last 50 years, decades, do not work. Black women-led and Black male-led nonprofits historically, just on internal bias, have received less money per grant, less money per the salaries of the individuals, executive directors that have applied, and overall less funds directed to the organization. We have data behind that. We have analysis behind that, that even if you account for not knowing how much money is needed for the program, the amount of money that will be awarded is still less for Black women-owned nonprofits, and especially Black male-led nonprofits. This is important in moving forward. One of the questions that I received when meeting with the Montgomery County Black Collective seems like a month ago, but I think it was a year when we first met. But one of the questions was, how was the community grants process or the grants process in the county going to benefit, impact, change in order to serve Black-led nonprofits and the Black community in Montgomery County? And one of the strategies was, well, what if we had, just a very focused grant making process, for minority-led organizations? And that was one of the participants that asked me. And I remember thinking, well, that wasn't the way that I was looking at the data. The data shows that where there is the need is where the impact and the funding should be invested. That's So if there is more need in a particular community, if there is more need in a particular service, that's where the fund should be invested. If that ends up being all one race, all one ethnicity, all one geography, then that's where we would need to focus in order to get the greatest impact. And I think that flips the switch a little bit on understanding that grant making is not necessarily what you would think a fair process, right? It's not you apply and everybody has an equal chance. No, you apply and everyone does not have an equal chance. Some organizations are better suited to bring the impact, the trust, the community organization, and the long-term sustainability than other organizations. And I believe that when we start asking questions and developing applications and interview questions that ask organizations and executive directors and their boards to say, how are you going to make this community trust you? Do you have that trust? How do you have the track record? How are you doing it? I think we'll be able to shift the needle, not even a little bit, because you guys know me, I'm not even trying to shift a little bit. I'm just trying to overhaul completely. I think that is very important. And then one more point, last point is, when you are interacting with the government and the government officials and analysts like me or elected officials, if there is a process or a model that has not been overhauled yet, or is not in the process of being overhauled yet, please question it, because there is no structure that I have seen in just 4 years at the county that worked 40 years ago and is still relevant today. So if there's anything that we can advocate for together, is that we overhaul processes that have been in place for decades. They are no longer relevant or work in this post-COVID era. Thanks.
Thank you, Carolyn, for confirming what we've felt, the disproportionate lack of investments to nonprofits serving Black residents. We're hoping the Black Collective's efforts will strategically redefine how our communities are invested in, cared for, and supported, especially as we recover from the pandemic. Before we move on to our next presenter, I did want to ask Dr. Crowell if the inequities census data that you shared is publicly available.
I was literally typing you a message and preparing to post a link to the heat map that we use in our equity framework decision-making. So if you'll give me, I'll finish my message and I will hit send on the link and you'll have that.
Thank you, Dr. Crowell.
You're welcome.
So now I'd like to welcome Mr. Ash Shetty, Director of the Montgomery County Office of Procurement. Ash leads a team of approximately 40 sourcing and compliance specialists. They are responsible for a portfolio of more than 2,600 contracts, exceeding $5 billion worth of public funds. Before this role, Ash was a vice president at Gartner, where he worked with chief procurement offices and officers of large multinational organizations to address critical functional challenges, such as supplier performance and risk management. Ash, welcome.
Hi, good morning. It's so nice to be here with you all. I know that we're probably behind schedule, so I'll keep my remarks extremely brief, but I'll leave you an open invitation to connect with me one-on-one. If you want to set up a meeting with me, I don't have an admin. My own email address is ash.shetty@montgomerycountymd.gov. Once again, it's my first name, last name, @montgomerycountymd.gov. Shoot me an email and let's set up time to chat one-on-one. That said, in 3 minutes, I want to tell you about 3 opportunities that we've been able to create to support the local and minority business communities. So first and foremost, what Dr. Crowell said is absolutely true. Most of us directors have basically been around for about 2 years and have definitely seen one of those 2 years hijacked by COVID. Despite that, I think in the spirit of not letting a crisis go to waste, I'll share with you some of the things that we've done that hopefully will improve outcomes for minority and small businesses in Montgomery County. So during the pandemic, we were able to launch e-procurement in Montgomery County government, which basically means rather than having to come to our offices to submit your solicitations, you now have the option of either coming into the office and submitting those solicitations or doing it entirely digitally. We've also changed some of the back-end processes so that they're more efficient from our perspective and more transparent from your perspective, in that you have access to things like our solicitation tracker, which will tell you where exactly any given solicitation is in the procurement process. Now, another innovation, if you would call it that, is we completely redesigned our website during the pandemic so that it is a lot more vendor-centric. In fact, there's an entire section dedicated to vendor resources. Some of those resources are just really easy to watch 90-second videos where you can watch almost TikTok-style instructions on how to register to be a vendor, understand what the procurement process for the county looks like. And again, I feel like this information is power. It helps you, get your ducks in a row so that you are more easily able to get a contract with the county. Another related innovation, if you will, was we created a portal last month called the Vendor Innovation Portal. And I think this group will appreciate it. As vendors use that portal to share their capabilities with the Montgomery County departments, one of the questions that we ask is not only how are you going to save the county money or time, but we also ask the question, how are you going to reduce inequity in Montgomery County through your services? And again, not every business is going to be able to respond to that question, but I do see reducing inequity as a priority of my office, and to the extent through our contracts we can do that. It is something that I wanted to showcase. The third and last thing I just want to share with you, and this is just information that's it's public information, but people don't often think about it. So in a given year, my office will see spend of about $1 billion go through us. Of that, last year, we spent almost $183.5 million with minority and female businesses. We spent about 120 million of that, and there's obviously a good bit of overlap there, with local Montgomery County-based businesses. In our annual reports, we did note that a lot of our local business programs are a huge help to the minority business community because a lot of our local vendors happen to be minority businesses. Now, starting this year, one of the changes I made in the post-COVID era was I've asked that all solicitations that are under $100,000 first be offered exclusively to Montgomery County-based businesses. The idea being that the smaller, $100,000 is not a whole lot of money, but to a small business that is teetering, that's hanging on by a thread, that might be the difference between being able to tide over during this pandemic and its aftermath, or having to permanently shut their doors. But what you will have noticed is an increase in the number of sub $100,000 contracts coming out only to local businesses. And this was done again, just because realizing the trauma that a lot of local businesses have suffered, and to the extent adversely affected our supply base, we wanted to give local businesses that opportunity. So there's lots of stuff happening. I actually keep a spreadsheet. There's now about 50 different items that we've been able to do to improve, hopefully improve outcomes for our customers. And when I say customers, I don't mean the using departments, I mean the business community. And like I said, I'm very happy to discuss those with you one-on-one. But for now, thank you again for having me here. And I look forward to hearing back from you when you have your report ready.
Thank you, Ash, for providing a snapshot of the county's investments during the pandemic. As I mentioned earlier, the pandemic has provided opportunities to change how we do business in our county and empowered us to leverage technology to improve how we share information with current and potential vendors, and transform how we will address inequities in funding through an intersectional lens as we move from the pandemic and into recovery. So our last and certainly not least focus area that we will address today is education and the opportunity gap that continues to persist for Black youth in Montgomery County. Due to the many graduations and academic ceremonies and events going on this week, Dr. Monifa McKnight, Acting Superintendent for Montgomery County Public Schools, was unable to join us this morning. However, she did record a video message providing insights into the school experience of Black students and what is being done to address the challenges that exist.
Good morning. I am Dr. Monifa McKnight, and I am the Acting Superintendent for Montgomery County Public Schools. I am thrilled to be here today at the Montgomery County Black Collective Agenda meeting this morning. Thank you for having me. I'll begin by sharing a few pivotal points of my story and why I am sitting here today having this conversation with you. I started my teaching career in Newport News, Virginia. And in that first year of teaching, I had a student deliver a very critical letter to me. In that letter, she shared that she saw herself in me. She was an African-American student. Her name was Carla, and I'll never forget her. That is what we need for our students, to have educators in whom they can see themselves, who share similar experiences and understanding, so the school can become a place of building relationships, learning, and growth. When I proposed to my school leadership during my first year of teaching that I work on assembling a teaching force that looks like the students that we serve by helping to recruit teachers from local historically Black colleges and universities like the one I attended, I was told that that wasn't my job to help. That comment never satisfied me. And again, that's why I am sitting here today, because that shaped my future forever. And I've made that my job ever since, knowing the importance of it. This time 20 years ago, I was actually wrapping up my first year of teaching in Montgomery County at Parkland Middle School. My first year of teaching in MCPS left me feelings in which I felt very proud of the connections I was able to make with my own family. It reminded me of my family in South Carolina, where my mother served as a food service worker in our local school system. And I was prideful about my family and what we represented in our community. When I came to MCPS, I instantly formed relationships with my grade level teaching team. They taught me everything I needed to know: how to effectively lesson plan for the needs of all children, which was critically important to my journey as becoming a meaningful teacher, all the way to things around financial planning. And there was a lot that I didn't know about that I learned from people who had experience with it. And I've enjoyed those lessons and realized how important it is to build relationships beyond just the work that we do. Time and time again, I have seen and felt that family bond within MCPS, our students, our staff, and our communities. The connections we share with one another as members of the MCPS family have made one thing clear, and that is that MCPS has a great school system, and it's had one for a long time that's benefited many of our students in our communities. But we all know that it has not been great for every student. And we also know that oftentimes it is our Black students who have not been extended the same opportunities and the same levels of excellence that represent the best of what MCPS has to offer. This becomes even more critically important right now. As we recover from the pandemic, that has to change. We have to build a school experience that is better than ever before. That school experience must be filled with access, opportunity, and growth across social, emotional, and academic domains. And it must be filled with relationships and freed of bias and hate that sometimes find its way into our classrooms and to our schools that must be eradicated. It must put our students first. Building that experience requires a focus on recovery from the tremendous disruption that the pandemic has caused. And we know that disruption has disproportionately impacted our Black and Brown communities. So, as we look ahead to the fall, MCPS is charging ahead, planning for a return to 5 days per week of in-person instruction with a teacher in front of every student. And for our students in extenuating circumstances, we're excited to open an innovative virtual academy that builds on the successes of virtual learning this past year. We are not simply going back to business as before when we fully reopen. We are meeting our students' needs by mitigating learning loss across our schools, focusing on our most poverty-impacted schools, and reaffirming our attention towards students' social and emotional well-being. That work begins this summer as we are vastly expanding summer programming in our schools so that learning continues. MCPS cannot do this work alone. MCPS should not do this work alone. Therefore, we are relying on you, our community, to all work together as we build a unified educational experience for our students. We can expect to see MCPS in the communities in the coming weeks and months as community navigator programs, doing door knocking campaigns, as we assist families through smoothly transition back into in-person learning. I am happy to share the sentiment that is bringing us together this morning. Indeed, the time is now. As we commit to the importance of this moment, Dr. King's reminder of the fierce urgency of now rings true. We can no longer just survive. The time is now. We have to thrive. We must prosper. I look forward to our continued work together. Thank you.
And we want to thank Dr. McKnight for taking the helm so seamlessly in her acting duties to prioritize access, opportunities, and growth rooted in social emotional learning. To build a more unified educational experience for our students transitioning back to in-person learning in the fall. We look forward to receiving more updates on their progress. And now it is time for the exciting interactive portion of our time together today. We will move into 3 virtual breakout rooms shortly. You can select from these 3 options: education and the opportunity gap for our youth and young adults, facilitated by William Roberts, president of the Association of Black Democrats and co-founder of the State of Black Montgomery. The health and wellness imperative discussion was facilitated by Ms. Pamela Luckett, vice president of the Association of Black Democrats of Montgomery County, and the road to economic equity, facilitated by Dr. Drina Valentine, Montgomery County Collective Partner and founder and CEO of Integrative Management Solutions, LLC. I want to thank those individuals who responded to the question posed during the Black community's top issues during the registration process. We couldn't address them all in the time that we have today, but these are the 3 issues that we received the highest consensus on. In the breakouts, we want you to roll up your sleeves and share freely and frankly about the issues that should be prioritized and included in the Black Agenda 2021. Given the 60 minutes for the breakout session today, not everyone will have an opportunity to speak. The moderators will guide the conversation and select individuals to speak based on raised hands. We ask that you offer clear and concise points to allow many to share. We also encourage you to take your thoughts and ideas and suggestions to the chat function. The note takers will be sure to extract information from there for the summary. Our goal is to leave the breakouts with at least 3 to 5 top priorities that we, like elected officials, business leaders, and funders, to consider, respond, and commit to addressing. As an example, in support of our first event focused on wellness and self-care, the priorities developed to address the mental health and wellness needs of Black residents included the availability of 24-hour testing and vaccine sites, call center support for seniors or hard-to-reach populations, the establishment of accessible mobile testing and vaccine sites, financial support to promote and encourage access to mental wellness resources, and subsidize mental health and wellness co-pays for those with limited to no health insurance. At the end of the hour, we will return to the large group, and the facilitators will report on the priorities developed and share next steps. Welcome back. I hope that you found the discussions in your breakouts insightful and productive. I am so eager to hear some of the recommended vital priorities to exact transformation in our community. Let's hear from Pam and health and wellness, then Dr. Drina on economic equity, and close with Will sharing the education priorities. Take it away, Pam.
Okay, we had a great discussion and we kind of ran out of time. So I just want to make sure I capture everything and hope that I can have the ability to ask my note takers to comment if I leave out anything. One of the first things that we discussed was the fact that when we look at health disparities in the community, the data that is being used is older data that has developed some of the programs, and that there's currently 2020 data that's available. And so the first thing would be to get the 2020 data to really push to make that available from the county to be able to compare and see what changes, if any, have been made, what improvements have been made, what things might have gotten worse, and in particular to add a lens of COVID to that. Because of course, if we had the 2020 data and there was no COVID, there'd be one difference, but there's a whole nother difference that can be in place with that. So that was our first point that we wanted to look at. Secondly, we talked about infant mortality and to have more emphasis on educating people on infant mortality, but really addressing the attitude of racism in care, because we do know that that gap continues. And we talked about things like perhaps a door-to-door or evaluating, or door-to-door educating and then evaluating, but also looking deeper into the African American Health Program, the SMILE program that deals with infant mortality, and looking at the results over the last 10 years and to see in terms of the campaigns that they have, is there, a way to perhaps retool the strategy if needed, if we see the results against what is currently occurring, if there is, just how we can do better. I think that we kind of looked at things from the standpoint of, if the same thing is occurring over and over and over, the problem is not to tweak it or kind of, just add a little bit more, but to really look deeper into the systemic problem and deal with that directly. So that was another point, to not just tweak and add on, but to really just dig in and dig out, almost like a surgery. And finally, looking at access and availability to healthcare in our community. And we spoke about the fact that we talked about the 19% of the population, but we're 14% of those vaccinated. And are there ways to be more creative? So, for example, with people's working hours, maybe people can't get to the clinics that are open during the day. Is there a way to look at a 24-hour clinic structure in some cases that would provide more access and availability to help close the gap? And just also being able to, we had one person that talked about the need to really be able to give people tools to be able to educate members of their community. So you may have neighbors, or you live in a building, or your community, whatever that might be. How do we equip people to be able to almost be ambassadors within their own community about these health disparities and how to go about reducing them? Ludley or Denise, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that's good.
Thank you again, Pam. I think we'll move this over to Dr. Drina, and then we'll.
Thank you, Lorianne. We had a very robust conversation when it comes to economic development and how it's impacting not only Black businesses, but Black-led nonprofits. We too ran out of time, but we was able to capture some really good suggestions that we want to pose to in the next forum. So in terms of how Black businesses can be more successful in the county, one of the suggestions is better access to information, where there's been traditionally, the way that you found out about opportunities is through email and marketplace or different websites. But it was suggested that we consider how not only Black businesses, how we should consider how the Black community communicates, and that in order for us or for the county to be able to make a dent or be able to say, yes, we are intentionally communicating with in the Black community, to think about different modes of communicating with us. For example, the Black churches or faith-based organizations that already have in place very strong networks and are able to communicate with their parishioners. It was suggested that the county could use those types of entities in order to communicate to the community, to let them know that these opportunities are available. Our next question, in terms of trying to address how do we improve measures for equitable access, before we could even dive into really answering that question, what stood out for the participants was the fact that that we have no way of knowing how many Black businesses and Black nonprofits are out there. It's been suggested that in the past it's been a challenge in terms of keeping that information current, because there's so many, for instance, nonprofits that exist, but are small enough that they don't have to register. There are no mechanism outside of the state of for, or within the county, that is, to register as a Black business. And so there's the suggestion was, first of all, we need to get a handle on how many Black businesses are in the county and how many Black-led nonprofits are in the county. When it came to the discussion regarding sustaining Black wealth in the community, the suggestion was not so much so for the county effort, but that within a micro level, micro level of the community, is that we need to start informational sharing so that we can get it to the point that we can introduce it on a larger scale. And last but not least, we had a very brief discussion on access to capital. And the biggest thing that we needed, or the greatest need that we need the county to address, is what are the programs that currently exist that are helping Black businesses get access to capital. Now, we know that programs exist. They tell us they exist, but we're still not sure not only exactly what those programs are and how successful they are. Again, it was a very great robust conversation, one that we've ran out of time, and for all of those of us who are really committed to the topic in the area, we could have talked probably 30 plus more minutes. But thank you, Lorianne.
Thank you again, Dr. Drina. And now we will hear from Will.
Well, fantastic. Like everybody else, we had a great discussion. We went right right up to the buzzer, as we're in NBA playoff season, so our discussion ranged. I think the main buckets that we covered were sort of taking a look at what interventions we need to see as MCPS is bringing students back to school. You heard from Dr. McKnight at the top of our program today. Talked a little bit about the interaction between the council, the school board, and the community, and about sort of what pressure points we need to be applying there. And then also talked about how we're preparing our students for higher education, but also the employment pipeline. Really quick on virtual learning. We examined a little bit how MCPS has rolled out this virtual learning academy and some of the missteps of the rollout in terms of targeting. We talked about making sure that disparities present that we know of, in in-person learning don't persist in that learning academy. Very interestingly, the majority of the students that have applied for or expressed interest, I suppose, in the virtual learning academy are Black and brown. And so want to make sure that they're not falling through the cracks, and that the opportunity gap that we're seeking to address, the pre-COVID opportunity gap, coupled with COVID learning loss, doesn't exacerbate educational issues for students that are interested in that virtual learning space. And of course, connected to that, we talked about really MCPS's capacity, not just to be able to serve students in a hybrid model. We know some of the issues with Chromebooks, et cetera, but also talked about their capacity to understand where the needs exist for our students. And we really dug down and had a great conversation about the core of this issue, which is how to get at this data in a continuum that includes MCPS, nonprofits, educational nonprofits, and county government, to really understand where students are and how to meet students where they are, to really understand how to get MCPS and those nonprofits to be communicating better about what kind of services students need, so that we can make sure that we're targeting resources toward the needs. We also talked a little bit procedurally, about some of the efforts, which we'll definitely be talking about with the council in our next session. Some of the efforts ongoing to make investments in broadband across the state and the county, and how that, of course, interacts with students that'll be learning virtually. And talked about the need to continue to have that pipeline to our HBCUs, both for our students as an educational opportunity, but also that pipeline back from some of our HBCUs to have those students fill fellowship opportunities at the council, which are not happening right now, which you all know as a Howard alum does not sit well with me. So we had that conversation, and then also talked about, again, how we're making sure that we're linking up our students for those career paths of the future. And that's sort of the very broad strokes, because I know we're running out of time, but we had a really rich discussion and really excited for how we're going to be able to build this and into the agenda as we go forward.
Thank you, Will. And thank you to everyone who participated. This was amazing. We have the foundation for the framing of the Black Agenda 2021. We will take these points, review the recordings, and develop the 2-page brief to present to leaders for a response. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the close of our second event. Give yourselves a round of applause. Before we go, on behalf of the Montgomery Black Collective and the state of Black Montgomery, I'd like to give a tremendous thank you to our experts, facilitators, and all of you. Thank you for the time you've taken to share your experiences and to participate. We'd also like to thank our sponsors who committed financially through contributions and in-kind services to make this event series possible. First, Beta Associates, Nonprofit Village, and Sandy Spring Bank. And a big thank you to our community media provider, Montgomery Community Media, and their production team. Please mark your calendars for our 2 remaining virtual events. We are here on June 24th when we will meet with elected officials, business leaders, and funders to discuss these priorities, our concerns, and desired solutions. And then charting our course forward on July 14th, when we will reconvene to review what we learned on June 24th, and finalize an actionable Black Agenda 2021 that will be shared countywide and used as our roadmap to advocate and hold those in leadership accountable to their commitments. Visit the collective's website at mocoblackcollective.org and click on the events page to learn more about these sessions and register. Given the importance of the transformational effort, we hope you will continue to participate in these critical dialogues. If you'd like to learn more about the collective, please send us an email at info@mocoblackcollective.org and help us spread the word. Follow us on Twitter, and we will have a Facebook presence very soon. And to you all, thank you for joining us. We hope that you were encouraged, informed, and inspired to stay connected with us. Now is the time. We are here, and we must chart our course forward. We look forward to seeing you on June 24th. Go and enjoy this beautiful day. This isn't goodbye, but we will see you again soon. Thank you.